movie begins in 1942 when Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor. Due to the attack, America also got dragged into World War II and wanted to take revenge on Japan. Thousands of torpedo fighter planes from the U.S. Navy get ready to enter the Pacific Ocean and destroy Japanese submarines. One such plane with radioman Gene Aldrich, the bomber, Tony Pastula, and their chief Harold Dixon was in the southern Pacific Ocean. Gene asks Harold for the coordinates but receives no response from him over the comms, so Tony gives Harold a tap as his comm might not be working. Harold replies after that, but he is nervous seeing all the clouds around him. He asks Tony to do another drift set of waves to determine their location. Then, Harold analyzed the drift set on his map and takes a turn to the east as they were somehow heading west. Gene tries to ask for help from their base, but hears the Japanese language, so he pulls out the radio cord. He tells Harold about this, and he orders him to send silent messages in Morse code. But unfortunately, their plane is running low on fuel, so Harold asks Tony to drop the bomb for altitude. Gene connects the radio again to at least get some response, but receives nothing. Seeing no other option, Harold asks his subordinates to grab the essentials like first aid and water as they'll be landing on the water soon. Everyone braces for impact and Harold crashes the plane onto the water. All three of them luckily survive, and Harold immediately gets out to release the raft. Gene and Tony also get out of the plane at the last minute as it sinks into the ocean. Then, Harold reaches the valve to expand the raft, but it inflates upside down. He asks Gene or Tony to get under the raft to flip it, but none of them are good swimmers. So Tony suggests that two can stay on one side to pull while the other one pushes from the other side. His plan works and they manage to flip the raft. They get on the raft one by one and lay inside the small space and introduce themselves properly. Then, Harold tells them not to worry as someone will surely come tomorrow to search for them. The following morning, Harold is the first one awake and wakes up his subordinates. Gene and Tony wake up and do their routine thing where Gene gives Tony fresh coffee. Now, Tony admires Harold's flying as he smoothly landed the plane in the ocean. Gene appreciates him too, but asks how far were they that they didn't receive a radio response from their base. He is unable to answer the question and they start looking in different directions as they need to look out for the search team. Gene and Tony are excited and optimistic about their return. After some time, they see a search plane and try waving their clothes as a signal to help. But all their efforts go in vain, as the plane doesn't even come near them. Gene and Tony are frustrated and Harold reveals that it was their only chance. Since they are at a war, the procedure is to only give a quick look. Now, Harold announces that this raft belongs to the U.S., so he is its captain and they will be following his orders. Gene and Tony agree. Then they do an inventory check and they only have a pocket knife, a mirror, a water bag, and some useless stuff. Harold asks Gene to keep the pocket knife only in his pocket as a hole in the raft is the last thing they want. The only good thing is that their raft is relatively sturdy, and they need to minimize the wear as much as possible. So Harold asks them to take off their shoes and throw them into the water. But he keeps his shoes on the boat as one of them might need to walk sometime. Then Tony reveals that he still has his handgun in working condition and it might come in handy. Later, Harold gets a nightmare of his mistake, due to which they had to crash into the ocean. At night, Tony asks Gene how did he end up in the Navy and reveals he had too many mouths to feed at home. Whereas Tony joined the Navy because it was his mission to call the Navy a career. Then, one stays awake to keep watch while the other two take naps. During Harold's turn, he feels thirsty, so he resorts to drinking his pee. The next morning, they wake up and Gene does that coffee thing again with Tony. Tony asks Harold where are they and he replies 1,900 miles to Hawaii and 1,000 to Samoa. All they need is some favorable wind and they can reach the islands that are 600 miles next to them before Samoa. And it would take them a couple of weeks to get there. Tony says that they'll starve to death first. so Gene suggests that they can make a hook and line to fish for food. He throws the hook into the water and immediately gets something on the line. But when he pulls it, their line breaks and their hook is gone. Later that day, all of them are being scorched by the harsh sunlight, and Gene is hopeful that he'll catch a fish with his new hook. But soon enough, his patience dies and he jumps into the ocean to fight the heat. Harold warns him about the sharks in the ocean, so he starts to quickly get back to the boat. Luckily, he gets back on time and they decide to not go in the water anymore. In the evening, they witness a beautiful sunset before going to sleep. The following morning on day 5, Gene hopelessly does the coffee thing with Tony. Tony is extremely thirsty and asks if there is a rule against drinking a handful of ocean water. But Harold convinces him to not commit suicide as it will suck the blood right out of his brain. Suddenly, Harold realizes that he has a pencil in his pocket and they can make a chart. He creates a rough map and explains that they are somewhere around here. So now they only need to hold their position during the favorable wind and let their raft sail when the wind's correct. And they should reach the islands by this method. Everyone finally gets their hopes up and starts making an anchor with whatever they have. Harold throws the sea anchor and now they can avoid being blown away in the wrong direction. After some time, Harold says that rain is the best thing that could happen to them right now, so Gene starts praying to the Lord for rain. Tony and Harold join him too and recite their prayers. Then, they sing poems together to cheer themselves up. Luckily at midnight, their prayers are heard and it starts raining. They collect as much water as possible and are delighted to drink something after a week. During the day, Gene is still trying to catch fish and Harold says that he is the most patient fisherman he has ever seen. Gene soon gets agitated and pulls out his pocket knife to catch a fish. Harold tries to stop him as he might poke a hole in the raft, but Gene doesn't stop. He hits something and when he pulls out, it's an entire shark. Harold and Tony hold the shark while Gene kills it with his knife. Then he cuts the shark open and after so long, they finally have a meal. Everyone is happy that their stomachs are full and they are heading in the right direction. Harold asks if any one of them is married and they say no. Tony has got a girl back in town and he says Gene can talk to his sister Frances. He describes Frances to Gene and Gene fantasizes about her. After some time, their boat gets surrounded by sharks, so Tony pulls out his handgun. Luckily, sharks don't attack their raft. During the night, Gene's hand gets bitten by a shark, so they tie it with a cloth. The next morning, they drink their rationed water and pray to God for another rain. After some days, Tony is staring at his handgun, so Gene takes it from him. He points the gun toward Harold and shoots the albatross sitting near him. Harold immediately jumps into the water to get the dead bird, but a shark starts following him. He gets to the raft just in time and the shark passes below them. Then they enjoy their meal and go to sleep. Harold gets another nightmare about the incident and wakes up to find no one on watch. He scolds them for sleeping on duty, but Gene argues back and says there is no wind. Tony agrees to keep watch, but Gene stops him and asks where the islands are. They were supposed to be close now, but they can't even see them. Harold confesses that they should have seen the islands 4 days ago, but his estimations are not accurate. Then we get to know that the reason they got lost in the first place is that Harold fell asleep while navigating the plan. And he woke up when Tony gave him a tap, so it was too late to make a turn. Harold now apologizes for his mistake and Gene gives him his map back as it is the only hope they have. Harold gets his hopes back and cuts his shoes to make oars so they can row the boat. They start rowing the boat but soon get tired due to the scorching heat. Some days pass by and they keep rowing slowly and slowly. After some days, it rains once again and they get to drink some water. But the rain soon starts turning into a hurricane. They brace themselves for the impact, but Harold gets thrown away by the waves. He gets back to the raft, but another huge wave flips their raft upside down. They flip the raft again with the help of wind this time and get on it. The hurricane passes after some time and all three of them make it out alive. They can barely move due to fatigue, but still, they try to row the boat. The next day, Harold sees Tony not moving and calls for him, but he doesn't respond. He and Jean get worried, but Tony is luckily still alive and moves slightly. Harold turns around to look and sees an island in the distance. All three of them are delighted to see land and start rowing towards it with their hands. They soon leave the raft and reach the shore on their knees. They gather their last bit of energy to stand up and start moving towards a nearby hut. Then, during the footnotes of the movie, we learn that this was based on a real story and 3 men survived after spending 34 days in the Pacific. Harold was awarded the Navy Cross for bringing his men to safety. Tony couldn't fulfill his dream of calling the Navy a career due to his injuries. Whereas Jean served out the war as a radioman and married Tony's sister Frances. Then we get to see a picture of the real survivors and the movie ends there. The end.